At around 7:40 a.m. on November 7, 1998, a 911 caller reported heavy smoke pouring from the Nixon Hearing Aid Center on Malibu Drive in Lexington, Kentucky. First responders quickly knocked down the flames and pushed their way inside, down a darkened back hallway, and tragically discovered the body of 43-year-old Linda Marie Rutledge. What looked like a tragic fire death was instantly ruled a homicide, as Linda had been shot multiple times in the head. Turns out the fire was just a cover-up, and finding out who pulled the trigger would take 27 years, eventually leading police straight to one of the country's most elusive serial killers. Linda was born on February 7, 1955, and was described as a reliable and hardworking individual. By the age of 43, she was married and had a son named John. Linda was most known for working at the Nixon Hearing Aid Center, a business her parents owned and operated. She typically handled administrative duties and was known for closing up the center at night, which is exactly what she was doing on the night of November 6, 1998, but something went horribly wrong, and by the next morning, firefighters were battling a blaze that was ravaging the center. When the fire crews made entry that morning and found Linda in the back hallway, something about the scene didn't quite add up. She had injuries that had nothing to do with the flames. The Fayette County Coroner's Office determined that Linda was sexually assaulted, and her cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the head. Whoever shot her then set the building on fire in an apparent attempt to destroy the evidence and cover up the horrific crime. The killer then stole her car and abandoned it at a nearby apartment complex. For years, the physical evidence sat waiting for science to catch up to it, specifically a .380 caliber shell casing that was recovered from the scene and the sexual assault kit. That day finally came in the summer of 2025, when Lexington detectives received a call from the Austin, Texas Police Department, informing them they had run evidence through the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, a federal database that compares markings on spent shell casings, and got a hit. The .380 shell casing from Linda's murder in Lexington matched a casing recovered in Austin back in December of 1991 from the scene of what the country had come to know as the yogurt shop murders. The Kentucky State Police Forensic Lab examined the casings from both cities, and their preliminary comparison reached a chilling conclusion. The rounds had been fired from the same gun. For anyone unfamiliar, the yogurt shop murders were among the most notorious cold cases in America. On the night of December 6, 1991, 4 teenage girls, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, her 15-year-old sister Sarah Harbison, and 13-year-old Amy Ayers, were bound, shot, and killed inside an I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop in Austin. The store was then set on fire, destroying much of the evidence. The case went unsolved for decades, and during that time, over 50 people had falsely confessed to the crime, including 6 written false confessions. In 1999, investigators arrested 4 teenagers for the crime: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Welburn. High-pressure tactics had been used to extract detailed confessions from Springsteen and Scott, leading to them both spending nearly a decade behind bars before their convictions were overturned. Years later, in 2025, when the evidence officially exonerated the 4 men, they sued the city and were awarded a $35 million settlement. Meanwhile, investigators were busy tracking down the killer, and while the ballistics were staggering on their own, they still weren't sure who owned the weapon. So in September of 2025, the preserved sexual assault kit from Linda's case was sent to DNA Labs International for testing. From there, the DNA was linked to a man named Robert Eugene Brashers, who was identified in 2018 for the murders of Jenny Zetricki and Sherry and Megan Scherer. Brashers was born on March 13, 1958, in Newport News, Virginia, and by the time investigators linked him to the 3 murders, he had been dead for more than 25 years. Before that, he had moved constantly between states from the South and Midwest, worked construction jobs, formed relationships, and blended into the communities around him. But behind that ordinary surface was a pattern of extreme violence that would only come into focus long after he was gone. In 1985, Brashers shot a young woman in Florida who survived, and he was convicted of attempted murder, but only served about 3 years before being released for good conduct in 1989. In April of 1990, in Greenville, South Carolina, he sexually assaulted and strangled 28-year-old Jeannie Zetricki in her own apartment. In 1991, he murdered the 4 girls at the Austin yogurt shop. In 1997, he sexually assaulted a young girl in Memphis, Tennessee. And in March of 1998, in Portageville, Missouri, he murdered 38-year-old Sherry Scherer and her 12-year-old daughter, Megan, tying them up before shooting them to death. Roughly 2 hours after that double murder, he tried to force his way into another home in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and shot a 25-year-old woman who fought him off and survived. Unfortunately, he was never linked to any of these crimes until the use of investigative genetic genealogy. In 2018, work led by genealogist C.C. Moore of Parabon Nanolabs, combined with a DNA sample voluntarily provided by Brasher's own daughter, tied him to the crimes in Missouri, Tennessee, and South Carolina. His remains were then exhumed that September, and testing confirmed the matches. The timeline of Brasher's final months makes Linda's death all the more agonizing. In April of 1998, he'd been arrested in Paragould, Arkansas, while trying to break into a woman's home. Unfortunately, he was allowed to bond out and fled to Kentucky, where he murdered Linda 7 months later. Just weeks after that, on January 13, 1999, Kennett, Missouri police noticed a stolen vehicle parked outside a local Super 8 motel room and were able to trace the vehicle's registration paperwork back to Brasher's room, unaware that a serial killer was inside. Brasher's wife answered the door and provided a fake name, claiming that her husband wasn't there. However, officers insisted on searching the room and found him armed with a handgun, hiding under one of the beds. This led to a 4-hour standoff and ended with Brasher taking his own life. The gun he used was the same gun used in the yogurt shop murders and in Linda's murder. Unfortunately, officers at the time had no clue he had murdered 8 people, and he essentially took his secrets to the grave with him. On January 7, 2026, the Lexington Police Department officially named Robert Eugene Brashers as Linda's killer. Investigators continue to look into the chilling possibility that Brashers was involved in additional unsolved murders across the country, and they are asking the public for help. If you or anyone you know has information regarding other crimes Robert Eugene Brashers may have committed, please contact the FBI at 1-800-225-5324. On the evening of Sunday, March 25, 1990, 39-year-old Lucinda Strange slipped on her headphones, told her husband she was heading out for her usual walk, and stepped out onto Clarktown Road in Bardstown, Kentucky, never to be seen alive again. While officers first assumed she'd been struck by a car, an autopsy would reveal one of the most haunting murders in Nelson County history. Mary Lucinda Strange was born in central Kentucky on August 26, 1950, one of 12 children born to Thomas and Anna Osborne. She married Richard Jerome Strange, who everyone knew simply as Jerome, and by 1990, the two had been together for more than 20 years. In 1983, the couple found what they considered their piece of paradise, a secluded 10-acre property at 129 Clarktown Road in Bardstown, where they raised their 2 children, Travis and Allison. Lucinda, as well as her daughter, worked at the local Holiday Inn, and after work, she liked to walk the country road near her home for exercise. By all accounts, she was devoted to her family, had no reckless habits, and had no known enemies, and just weeks before the tragedy, she became a grandmother. Then came Sunday, March 25th, 1990. That day, Lucinda came home from work and around 7 o'clock set out on her walk as she always did. As the evening light faded and she still hadn't returned, Jerome began to worry. Then came a knock at the door. It was the passerby informing him that he'd found a body in the ditch about 200 feet from the house. Jerome, now panic-stricken, rushed out of the house and down the dark road and found Lucinda's body in a ditch with her headphones and a broken radio scattered around her. He covered her body with his own coat and called for help. When the coroner first examined the scene, the working theory was a hit and run, and on the surface, that made sense as she was found on the edge of the road and had a severe injury to her head. But a closer examination told a very different story. Not immediately visible was the fact that Lucinda had been stabbed more than 40 times. Once this was discovered, her death was immediately reclassified as a homicide. That many stab wounds are not typical of a robbery or random encounter, leading investigators to believe her killer knew the area and knew that she walked the same route regularly. They also theorized that the killer had planned the attack out in advance and had been waiting for her along the road. In the early days, police did what investigators do in any case like this and looked first at the people closest to her. Jerome was questioned and examined, as any spouse would be, and eventually ruled out. Detectives also chased down a rumor that Lucinda might have seen or known about drug activity at the Holiday Inn, which could have provided a motive. But when investigators looked into the rumor, they found nothing to support it. What they were left with was a brutal killing with no clear motive, no witnesses, and no suspect. The case would eventually go cold. Just a few months after Lucinda's murder, about a dozen or so miles away, a 15-year-old girl walked out of the woods with a nearly unbelievable story of survival. She said she had been abducted, held captive at a remote campsite, and that she had shot and killed one of her captors before escaping. When police raided that camp, they found the dead man, Philip Clopton, and evidence pointing to his associate, a man named James Ray Cable. In the years that followed, DNA testing would confirm that Cable was a serial killer responsible for the deaths of multiple Kentucky women stretching back to the early 1980s. Because Cable was active in that same window, and because his camp sat within roughly 20 miles of Clarktown Road, some have wondered whether he could have had a hand in Lucinda's death. Kentucky State Police, however, have never officially connected Cable to her murder, and there are real reasons for skepticism. His known victims fit a different profile, and his documented method of killing was not the frenzied stabbing that took Lucinda's life. Instead of stabbing his victims, he would kidnap them, transport them to an isolated area, and then torture and sexually assault them. Most of his victims died from the beatings they received from Cable. They had also recovered his diary, where he detailed his horrific crimes, including confessions to other unsolved homicides and a hand-drawn map to a victim's remains. However, there was absolutely no mention of Lucinda Strange. That doesn't rule out either man, though. Cable died in prison in 2013, and if he did know something about her murder, he took it to the grave with him. In the years since, Lucinda's family has refused to let her be forgotten. For a long time, they placed annual newspaper notices asking the same painful question: why a woman with no enemies was stabbed more than 40 times while walking down a country road on a Sunday evening, and pleading with anyone who knew something to finally come forward. Jerome spent the rest of his life waiting for a phone call that never came, telling reporters that he carried no anger because there was no one to direct it at. This case would largely be overshadowed by a string of other murders involving Brooks Houck. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for murdering his girlfriend, Crystal Rogers, in 2015. He's also a suspect in the 2013 murder of Bardstown police officer Jason Ellis and the 2016 murder of Crystal's father, Tommy Ballard. There is also the 2014 murder of special education teacher Kathy Netherland and her teenage daughter, Samantha, but their deaths have never been tied to Brooks. As of today, Lucinda's murder remains unsolved, and the Kentucky State Police are still searching for answers. If you or anyone you know has information about her murder, please contact the Kentucky State Police at 1-800-222-5555. Lucinda was found murdered on March 25, 1990, and as of July 2026, this case remains unsolved.